This boy's been poisoned. The words rip through the ward as alarms wail. The millionaire's son lies motionless, his skin pale against white sheets. Doctors scramble, voices collide, chaos swallows the room. His father crumbles in disbelief, until the nanny steps forward, trembling but unshaken. I know who did this. Marble floors echoed with silence, chandeliers glimmered like frozen stars. The millionaire's son lived in a palace built on wealth, yet he felt the chill of emptiness. His father gave him toys, tutors, and trust funds, but never tenderness. In the quiet corners, it was the nanny's arms that gave him the warmth of home. She was never dressed in silk, never seated at the grand table, yet her presence carried more weight than the finest jewels in that mansion. The black nanny walked the halls with quiet dignity, her hands calloused from years of labor, her heart steady as stone. She was the one who wiped his tears when the father's voice thundered through the walls. She was the one who whispered stories of courage into his ear when loneliness pressed heavy on his chest. Every morning she tied his shoes, not just with care, but with love. Every night she tucked him beneath blankets, guarding him from shadows money could never chase away. She was more than a caretaker. She was a shield, standing between the boy and the cold indifference of a household where affection was rationed. But her devotion was not welcomed by all. The father's eyes often lingered on her with suspicion, as though love from her hands somehow weakened his son. Relatives rolled their eyes, whispering that she overstepped her place. Yet the boy never wavered. When he held her hand, when he leaned against her shoulder, he knew one truth that all the gold in the world could not give. She was his family. Behind the golden doors, whispers spread like smoke. Servants traded glances when the boy clung to her hand instead of his father's. Relatives muttered during dinners, questioning why the nanny's voice carried more comfort than the man who owned the estate. They said her love was dangerous, that her presence blurred lines that should never cross. Even the father, proud and rigid, began to see shadows where there were none. He watched his son laugh at her stories, lean into her embrace, and the sight stung his pride. To him it was a reminder of his own absence, a wound that felt like betrayal. What outsiders saw as loyalty, he saw as theft. And so the bond between boy and nanny, once a lifeline, grew surrounded by suspicion. In that house of riches, love itself became the most contested treasure of all. It began with a sudden cry in the night. The boy doubled over, his small body shaking, vomit staining the silk sheets. Panic rushed through the halls, servants scrambling for help. Doctors arrived quickly, their coats flapping like ghosts in the candlelight. They examined him, wrote prescriptions, and left with practiced calm. "Spoiled food," they said, their voices flat, their eyes already elsewhere. But she stayed by his side, her hand cooling his forehead, her heart thundering with unease. She replayed the hours before the sickness. The boy had eaten nothing unusual. Only one thing stood out, the tea. A bitter aftertaste had lingered, sharp enough to wrinkle his nose. She tasted it once herself, faint but undeniable. A trace of something that didn't belong. Her suspicion grew heavy, too heavy to ignore. Quietly she spoke to the father, her voice trembling but firm. "It's not the food. It's in his drink." He silenced her with a glare, unwilling to believe the unthinkable. To accuse anyone of harming his son was to disrupt the order of his empire. So her warnings were buried, left unheard. And in the quiet that followed, she understood a chilling truth. Something far darker than spoiled food had entered their home. The boy felt it before anyone spoke. He saw it in her eyes, the way her hands lingered over his cup, the way her voice carried a quiet tremor when she told him to be careful. Fear, unspoken but heavy, wrapped around her every gesture. And so he clung tighter, refusing to let go of the only person who made him feel safe. But his father saw something else. From across the room, behind the polished desk stacked with contracts and figures, he watched with suspicion. To him, the nanny's warnings were poison of another kind, lies meant to draw the boy away, to weaken his loyalty to his own blood. Every word she spoke, every story she told deepened the father's doubt. The mansion grew thick with silence. Conversations at dinner ended in clipped tones. The air between father and nanny sparked like wires ready to catch fire. Servants walked softly, afraid to disturb the storm. The boy, caught in the middle, lived in two worlds, one where love guarded him fiercely, and another where pride built walls too high to climb. And with each passing day, the tension grew heavier, pressing down on them all, waiting for the moment it would finally break. The ballroom glittered with crystal and laughter, music swelling as glasses lifted in a toast. The boy smiled faintly, his hand shaking as he raised his drink. Then, without warning, his body convulsed. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against marble as he collapsed to the floor. Screams tore through the room. Guests scattered, women clutching pearls, men shouting for help. The father's voice cracked above the chaos. "Doctors! Somebody help my son!" As he dropped to his knees beside the pale, gasping boy. But in the middle of the storm, the nanny did not look at the boy's face. Her eyes locked on the half-empty glass still glistening with poison. While panic roared around her, she understood what no one else dared to see. The danger had been waiting in plain sight, poured into a toast meant to celebrate life. Sirens split the night as the ambulance tore through empty streets, its red lights bleeding across glass towers. Inside, the boy lay motionless, his skin drained of color, his chest rising only with the help of machines. The nanny held his hand, whispering prayers through the roar of the engine, while his father pressed against the wall, broken, silent. The hospital doors burst open. Bright lights swallowed the boy as doctors rushed him into sterile corridors. The sound of hurried footsteps, clipped orders, and machines clicking to life filled the air. Monitors flickered weakly, each faint beep a fragile thread between life and death. In corners, nurses murmured the word no one wanted to believe: poison. It spread quickly, colder than the air conditioning, sharper than the antiseptic sting. And as those whispers traveled, every glance turned toward the woman closest to him, the one who had raised him like her own. Suspicion hung heavy, pressing against her chest as if the walls themselves were accusing her. Inside the ICU, machines hummed in uneven rhythm, their lights blinking like fragile stars. The boy lay still, his chest rising only with effort, the air thick with antiseptic and fear. The father stood over him, his grief twisting into fury. His voice cracked, raw and unforgiving. "It was her. She did this!" Security guards stepped forward, their shadows stretching across the white walls. The nanny froze where she stood. Her hands trembled, but her gaze stayed steady, fixed on the father who had never truly seen her. Around them, silence fell heavy, broken only by the relentless beeping of the monitors. She swallowed, her voice low but unshaken. "You want answers? Then hear me. If you want your son alive, you must listen to me now." Her words cut through the tension like glass shattering. For a moment everything paused. The father's rage, the guards' advance, even the breathless panic in the room. Her eyes did not flinch, even as tears welled. This was no plea for mercy. It was a demand for truth. She had carried the boy through every shadow of his childhood. And now, when death itself stood over him, she would not let silence finish what poison had begun. Her voice broke the silence like a sudden storm. All eyes waited for her confession, but she did not claim guilt. Instead, she lifted her trembling hand and pointed across the room, not at herself, but at the man the father trusted most, the partner who had stood beside him through decades of business, the one welcomed into every private meeting, every family gathering. Gasps rippled through the room. The nanny's words poured out, each one sharp, deliberate. She spoke of late nights when she overheard whispers through cracked doors, deals discussed in hurried tones, promises of power if the boy were removed. She described the moment she saw a vial hidden in his jacket pocket, the same bitter scent that clung to the boy's teacup, the father's face drained, his grief colliding with disbelief. How could the man he called brother, confidant, betrayer of none, plot something so monstrous? The nanny's voice rose, steady now, her fear burned into resolve. "It was never me. It was him. And if you choose pride over truth, your son will be gone before dawn." Her words crashed against the walls like thunder, impossible to ignore, tearing apart the fragile fabric of trust the empire had been built on. The truth unfolded like shards of memory. Flashbacks revealed the partner standing in the father's shadow, his eyes narrowing as fortunes shifted beyond his grasp. He watched the boy grow, each birthday candle another reminder that the empire would never belong to him. Jealousy hardened into something colder, darker. In secret, he began to plan. A word here, a deal there, every step carefully hidden. The boy wasn't a child in his eyes, he was an obstacle, a lock on a door he longed to open. Poison became his key, but to the nanny the boy was more than bloodlines and inheritance. He was a fragile soul who trusted her completely, a child worth protecting, even when the world turned against her. While greed drove the partner toward destruction, love anchored her to a single vow. She would fight for the boy until her last breath. The ICU became a battlefield. Doctors moved like soldiers under pressure, voices sharp, commands colliding with the steady rhythm of machines. Each second felt stolen, each breath from the boy a fragile victory. Tubes, needles, and wires encircled him, as if the fight for his life had been strung together with threads of electricity and hope. In the corner, the father sat hunched, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face buried in his hands. For the first time, wealth had no weight, no power. He realized the empire he built could not buy back a single heartbeat. His chest ached with a truth he had ignored for too long. He doubted the one person who had truly loved his son without condition. Beside the bed, the nanny never moved. Her lips pressed into silent prayers, her fingers wrapped around his small hand. She whispered promises the boy could not answer. "Hold on, child. You are stronger than this. You are not leaving me now." Her voice broke into the stillness, soft but relentless, as though love itself could stitch his spirit back together. Between life and death, her faith was the only force that never wavered. The room held its breath, every sound swallowed by dread. Then a single blip broke the silence, faint, fragile, but alive. The monitor flickered with rhythm, a heartbeat fighting its way back from the edge. Nurses leaned closer. Doctors steadied their hands, and hope crawled slowly into the air. The boy's chest rose with a shallow breath. Then another. Color returned in the faintest shade, enough to draw gasps from those watching. His father, a man who once believed himself unshakable, collapsed against the wall, tears streaming freely down his face. The weight of power, pride, and empire meant nothing in that moment. He was not a millionaire. He was only a father begging for mercy. Beside the bed, the nanny released the breath she had been holding, her body trembling with relief. She bowed her head, whispering words of gratitude that slipped out like prayers. Love, stubborn and unyielding, had endured when everything else failed. Against betrayal, against poison, against death itself, love had won, quietly but completely. If you were the father standing in that room, would you have trusted her from the beginning, or let suspicion blind you? Tell us in the comments below, and if this moment touched you, share this story so others feel its power too. Your voice matters here. Police stormed the ward, their voices firm, their cuffs closing around the partner's wrists. He offered no defense, only silence that confessed more than words ever could. The father's eyes lifted, heavy with shame. Finally seeing the truth, the nanny had been the shield protecting his son all along. The doors burst open, and the quiet hum of machines was cut by the heavy steps of officers. Their presence carried the weight of justice long overdue. The partner stood frozen, his polished suit now nothing more than a mask unraveling. Cold steel clicked around his wrists, the sound echoing louder than any denial he could offer. He didn't fight, didn't speak. His silence was its own confession. The father watched, his chest heaving, eyes locked on the man he once trusted more than family. Rage flickered, but behind it came something sharper, shame. He had turned suspicion on the wrong person, blinded by pride, deaf to truth. His gaze shifted slowly toward the nanny, standing steady at the boy's side. In that moment, clarity cut through him. She had been the shield he never recognized, the quiet warrior who carried his son through shadows he refused to see. The chaos faded, leaving only the soft rhythm of machines and the boy's fragile breathing. The hospital room, once charged with panic, now sat in heavy silence. The father stood at the foot of the bed, his shoulders hunched, his eyes red from tears he could no longer hide. For years pride had been his armor, but tonight it shattered. He turned to the woman who had never left his son's side. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hands trembling from exhaustion, but her gaze remained firm, rooted in love that had never faltered. For the first time he truly saw her, not as a servant, not as someone beneath the weight of his fortune, but as the soul who had carried his child when he could not. His voice broke as he whispered, almost ashamed to speak the words aloud. "You saved my son. You raised him when I didn't." The nanny's eyes filled, though she held them steady. She didn't need his gratitude, but hearing it softened years of silence. In that room between life and death, gratitude finally replaced pride. And for the boy resting peacefully, that confession was a promise long overdue. Weeks passed and healing came slowly, step by fragile step. The boy's small frame, once bound to machines, now moved with careful determination. His hand rested firmly in hers as they crossed the grand hall together. Every echo of their footsteps filled the mansion with something new. Warmth. The house that once felt like a museum of wealth now breathed with life. Laughter replaced silence. Meals were no longer taken in icy solitude, but shared at the long table where she sat beside him, not behind. The father watched quietly, humbled, no longer blind to the truth standing before him. She was not the help anymore. She was family, woven into the boy's survival, into the walls of the home itself. And as the boy smiled up at her, the mansion's coldness gave way to something money could never buy. Belonging. Money can raise walls of marble and glass, but walls cannot hold back betrayal. Empires may glitter, but they crumble without trust. In the end, it was not fortune that saved the boy. It was the faith of the one who stood quietly beside him, through suspicion, through scorn, through danger. Never doubt the hands that reach for you in silence. They may be the shield keeping your world from breaking apart. The screen darkens, the voice soft but resolute. Money builds empires, but trust saves lives. Never doubt the ones who stand beside you in silence. They may be your only shield. Fade to black. Subscribe and don't miss the next story where truth triumphs over power.